Well, hello. It's been a little while. I hope you're doing very well. I've been staying warm and cozy, eating a ton of soup. So I thought today it would be nice to just make some soup together. I'm gonna make a little soup for dinner, and I'm also gonna make some delicious biscuits that I've been just loving lately. They're easier than your standard biscuit, and they're also way more flavorful. This is a cheddar and green onion drop biscuit recipe. You don't need to layer any butter, so it's just a mixing operation and a scooping operation, which is so nice and simple. I've got 4 green onions here. I always like to cut green onions in half first, so then I don't have to chop for as long. Next is the cheese. I say cheddar in the recipe, but really it's any grateable, meltable cheese that you have. 125 grams, which brings me to one of my favorite reasons for owning a digital scale. Not to get too off track here, but it is so great to be able to just weigh your cheese and know right away if you have enough. 142 grams, just a little over, but you know what? That's perfect because I'm a little bit snacky right now. So now I know that this is the perfect amount of cheese. It's so much easier than grating a bit of cheese, putting it in a cup, seeing if it's enough, finding out it's not enough, grating a little more. It's super annoying. I've got a standard box grater here. Just gonna grate it. No big whoop. Before I started chopping onions and grating cheese, I did turn the oven on to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and I put the oven rack in the middle, so it's ready to go. Okay, time to measure the dry ingredients. I'm gonna use a bowl placed onto a scale with a sieve in it so I can just chuck everything in. 340 grams of flour going in, and all of the cup measurements are on the recipe card as well. I just happen to be a grams lady, so I'm using grams. And then we have a tablespoon of baking powder, which is the same as 3 teaspoons, so I'll just do that since that's what I have. And then we have a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of sugar. It's not a sweet biscuit, but it's nice to have a little sugar. It kind of helps with the texture too, I find. Black pepper. It says half a teaspoon, but I just crack until I get bored. I don't even know if that'll go through the sieve, but we'll find out. And that's it for dry. So I'll just sift that together into the bowl. Yeah, got to dump that pepper in. Okay. Here's the fun part. We just dump in the wet ingredients. 250 mils or 1 cup of milk. This happens to be soy milk because that's what I have on hand, and it works great. I'm gonna pour in half a cup, 125 mils of olive oil, and then a little splash of cider vinegar. It says 2 teaspoons in the recipe, but again, I'm just gonna eyeball it. This is just to make the milk a little bit sour, and it just helps the texture of the biscuits. A tablespoon of Dijon mustard. This adds so much good flavor because biscuits are kind of notoriously flavorless, so we definitely don't want that. I'm just gonna whisk that together with my mini little whisk here. I've used grainy mustard instead of Dijon, and I loved it. I'm a huge grainy mustard fan, so feel free to do that. Then it's just a matter of mixing everything together. And I like to use a fork to mix because I just feel like it brings everything together nice and easy. Right after adding in the dry, it's also time to add in the cheese and the onions. And yeah, it's a good amount of cheese, I know. And one of the reasons why we can get away with not having flakes of butter is because cheese, when it melts, kind of does a similar thing to butter. It kind of creates, there's a bit of water in cheese as well, so the steam from the melted cheese kind of helps to create little pockets in the dough. It's just gonna come together into like a wet mixture. You just wanna make sure it's all nicely combined, but not overmixed, because if you overmix it, your biscuits will be tough and nobody will be happy. If you want, I should have mentioned, if you wanted to leave some of the cheese out and sprinkle it on top, you can do that too. I like to portion these out with a portion scoop. I wish I had a bigger one of these because it is like a heaped spoonful. If I had a bigger one, I would just make it level and they'd all be a bit more even, but for this size, it's kind of like a heaped thing. And I should end up getting 12. I have like this much dough left, so I'm just gonna top up my dough balls a little bit instead of making a brand new one. And that's it. If you wanna brush these with egg wash, you can. I don't tend to do it just because I don't feel like having, you know, a dish of beaten egg in my fridge, but I will crack a bit more pepper on top because I think I was a little bit skimpy on the pepper in the mix. And these puppies are going into my preheated 450-degree oven they're probably gonna take about 13 to 16 minutes. While the biscuits are baking, I have a few minutes to tell you about the most crazy, delicious cream of mushroom soup that I made recently. I started by slicing a ton of mushrooms, getting them into a Dutch oven with a little bit of oil, adding some water. This is a bit of a trick. People say don't add water to mushrooms, but it's actually great to add water to mushrooms as long as you allow the water to cook away. It's true that mushrooms soak up water and they're like sponges, but once all that water cooks away, you end up with like this super concentrated mushroom concentrate, basically. It's like you're creating a mushroom stock and then reducing it down. So you get a really nice brown, deep mushroom flavor. Once that's cooked all the way down and you get some browning on the bottom of the pot, you can add in the onions and garlic. This is gonna help sort of deglaze the mushroom brown bits from the bottom. And you just wanna cook the onions and garlic long enough till the onions are translucent, not really caramelized, just because we're not really going for that sweet onion flavor here. It's more of the savory onion flavor, and the brown kind of richness is coming from the mushrooms. Now that the onions are softened a little bit, it's time to add paprika, thyme, and white wine to the mushrooms, and then cook that down for another 2 to 3 minutes just to reduce the wine a little bit. Next, you go in with a splash of soy sauce and water. This is really gonna create the bulk of the soup. No need to add chicken stock or vegetable stock. If you had mushroom stock, go ahead and use it, or veggie, totally fine, but it's not needed. Let this mixture come up to a boil and then turn it down and simmer it for about 10 minutes. This is just to kind of let everything come together, let all that mushroom and onion, garlic, thyme flavor infuse. While that's happening, it's time to mix the thickening agent, which in this case is a little bit of cornstarch and evaporated milk. I like using evaporated milk because it is more stable than regular milk, and it does the kind of the same thing as heavy cream, but it's lighter. Bring the soup back up to a boil, add the cornstarch and evaporated milk mixture, let that thicken, just needs to come to a boil again, and then it'll thicken right away. Turn it off. And then the final touch is just a little bit of miso paste, which if you've cooked with miso before, you just know that it's this magic stuff. It just makes everything taste so good. It's a little bit salty, very savory, and it just really adds that last bit of oomph to the mushroom soup. It's so nice. At this point, it's just a matter of giving it a taste and adjusting for seasonings, adjusting for if you need any more water, if it's too thick for you. Soup is one of those things that you always need to adjust a little bit because it'll thicken up in the fridge overnight. It'll thicken up while it's sitting in the bowl. So just adjust with water as needed and with salt and pepper as needed. Sometimes, right before I serve this, I like to add just a little splash of white wine and not cook it out. I know that's not generally something that's done, but I do find that a last minute splash of white wine adds really nice acidity, which is really good in this otherwise very rich, creamy mushroom soup. The biscuits are done. Look how good they look. They're nice and puffed up and a little bit golden, especially where you can see the bits of melted cheese that have floated to the top. This is where you can see how if you put, you know, a little pile of cheese on top of each one, it's quite nice. Okay, so I'm just gonna put these to the side for now because they're very hot. And I still have to make dinner for tonight. So I'm gonna make my coconut corn chowder, which I haven't made in a while, and it's such a good one, and I'm craving it. I'm following the recipe because it's been a while since I've made it. I'm gonna start with 2 tablespoons of oil in a Dutch oven. I've got a couple onions here, 3 celery, and 1 pepper. I'm gonna add the salt, 2 teaspoons. I'm eyeballing as per usual. Then I'm gonna get the garlic and ginger going on. Just a rough chop. I personally don't mind chomping into little chunks of ginger. Cook these down for a few minutes. So I'm gonna put a lid on because I do like how sauteing, sweating the veggies down with a lid just goes a lot faster. And I'm gonna chop up the yams. I think in the States you guys call these sweet potatoes, the orange ones. In Canada we call them yams. Doesn't really matter. You can use the white ones too here. You can even use regular potatoes. I just wanted this soup to be like really colorful and fun for the winter, you know? I'd love to hear about some of your kind of go-to weeknight winter dinners. What's been working with your winter schedule? It gets dark so early now. It feels like it's nighttime at 4 o'clock. So very curious what tools you've been using, what you've been making. I've been using the Instant Pot a ton as usual. Okay, see, that was only a couple minutes and it really just helped to soften everything. We're in pretty good shape now. So I'm gonna add the yams. Real chunky guys. I'm also gonna add the corn. This is a whole whack of corn. This is frozen. You can use fresh if you have it this time of year. I'm gonna chuck it in. I'm gonna add the coconut milk. I do the trick where I shake it in the store, and if I don't hear any sloshing, that means it's a good one because there's a lot of thick coconut milk on top. Oh yeah, that was a good can. And then we just have to cover this barely with water. Oh yeah. So that's all I'm gonna do for water right now because the veggies are gonna leach some water as they cook. So I'm gonna leave it there. I've already added salt. Do I need to add pepper? Oh shoot, I forgot to add the spices. I should have added the spices before the coconut milk, but I didn't. So I'm gonna add them now. It's definitely better to add the spices before the liquid so they have a little bit of a chance to sort of bloom and toast. But, you know, sometimes you forget things. Teaspoon of ground cumin, turmeric, 1.5 teaspoons. Now I'm gonna let this cook with the lid on. Bring it to a boil. When it comes to a boil, I'll reduce the heat and let it cook till everything's soft. And while the coconut corn chowder is cooking away, I'm gonna tell you about one other soup that has been ruling my winter. It's a carrot and butternut squash soup with a nice little zing of ginger. I've made so many carrot and butternut squash soup recipes over the years. This one is very, very easy and it's very, very good. Start by cooking the onions down in some oil. And I like to cook the onions till they're quite brown, not quite caramelized, but you know, beyond translucent. I do like to get a bit of browning on here because it helps add sweetness to the soup. And we do want a bit of sweetness in a carrot butternut soup. While the onions are cooking, peel and mince some ginger and set it aside. Then you can peel the butternut squash, take the seeds out and cut it into 1 inch or so chunks. This can be pretty rough, and set that aside. I do like to save the squash seeds and roast them up for a little crunch. And sometimes I like to put some of the squash cubes aside too and cut them a little bit more perfectly into perfect little dices and roast those separately on a baking sheet for a little garnish. Totally optional. Peel the carrots and chop them up. I do like to cut the carrots smaller than I cut the squash because carrots are pretty firm and they take longer to cook. Once the carrots and squash are all chopped, you can dump those in with the onions, garlic, and ginger. Add some stock, add some bay leaves, and bring it all up to a boil. Turn it down and let it simmer for a good 20-25 minutes until the carrots and squash are super, super soft. While that's happening, I do like to roast the squash cubes separately for a little garnish. On the same tray, I squeezed out the squash seeds and I laid out a few pieces of bacon for a garnish as well. Now, if you're gonna do this, you do need to know that the squash seeds cook faster than everything else. So set a timer for 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, and take the seeds off before they burn. Once everything in the soup is soft, it's just a matter of taking out the bay leaves and giving it a blend. I like to use a stick blender for this, and I'm not too fussed about getting it super smooth. I actually prefer a bit of texture because I don't like it to be reminiscent of baby food. That's why I don't use a Vitamix for soups like this. It's just like too smooth, you know? And then just adjust the seasoning with a bit more salt and pepper if needed. Adjust the consistency by adding a little bit more water or stock. Serve it up with your toppings. I used some plain Greek yogurt here. Sadly, I didn't have the seeds for the crunch. I could have added some little crunched up crackers or croutons, a few of the squash cubes, and some crispy bacon. Okay, I think our chowder is ready for the next step. The yams are really nice and soft now. And now we have the option to mash a few of the yams up. I just like to use a potato masher. I do like to do this because it kind of just thickens the soup and it makes it a little bit more kind of cohesive. Just sort of break up some of the yams to thicken the broth a little bit. Honestly, that's it. I don't want to do any more than that. Oh yeah, see, everything's a bit more cohesive now. Instead of it being like broth with chunks, it's sort of thicker broth with smaller chunks, you know? So the last step is really just to throw in some bright green stuff. And I've used spinach in here. I've used broccoli, kale, whatever I have on hand, fresh parsley. I happen to have cilantro right now, so I'm gonna dump a bunch of that in. And the cilantro really goes well with this because it does have a bit of a sort of island flair, you might say. Oh my God, the corn. Even with frozen corn, it tastes super corny. It's sweet, it's savory, it's just perfectly seasoned. And how is this not gonna cheer you up? I mean, like this, the perfect thing on a dark, stormy day. Okay, I'm just gonna serve myself up here. It's really a stew. I mean, it's a chowder. It's a stewy, thick chowder. Squeeze with a little lime, just to seal the deal. And give it a try. Oh yeah. This is exactly what I want. I've been craving it and it's delivering. Even though it's so hot. Let us not forget about the biscuits, which I'm just thrilled about. These biscuits are so nice and tender. They're not flaky because we didn't flake them, you know, we didn't make the flaky layers, but they're tender. And that's really important. And they're super flavorful. This is my dinner and I'm so happy about it. I'm gonna go eat this in front of the TV. I hope you're all having a really nice cozy winter so far. Thanks for joining me and we'll talk to you soon.